so much for joining us today, and welcome to our OSRL webinar. So today we're going to be focusing on how emergency response and preparedness, how OSRL kind of supports this element in the offshore wind industry. We're going to talk a little bit about the present and future market trends, and sort of what we learned through our 40 years of experience in the oil spill response and preparedness industry kind of translates to what we see in the offshore wind industry. We also have a really exciting case study from a real project that we supported in Taiwan. So yeah, it's going to be a really packed webinar with a lot of really insightful information, and I'm really looking forward to pass you on to our speakers today. We have a really incredible team and a very special guest with us today. So with no further ado, I'll pass you on to our speakers. And yeah, please enjoy.
Thank you, Ines. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Yopi. I'm the Preparedness Solutions Manager for OSRL Asia Pacific. So I'll kick off my first session. After that, it will be followed by Marta, Sharina, and of course, before that, actually, Petra will be presenting after me to give you a very good overview about the offshore wind market outlook. So you may wonder why we OSRL are now talking about offshore wind. I think to some of you, you know us as Oil Spill Response Limited. Indeed, it is an interesting topic for us, therefore, to talk about offshore wind. And as most of you also know, that OSRL is industry-funded cooperation. We are wholly owned by the energy companies, in particular, the oil and gas companies. But of course, we also know that whilst they are in transition to the renewable energy, so they have requested OSRL as their response partner to assist them, to work with them, to support them, especially in equipping their partners in the offshore wind industry. And hence, here we are. And later on, you will hear some of the case studies of our involvement in the offshore wind. So let me start my sharing with questions. Let's go to the next slide. So we say offshore wind is the future of energy, but are we equally focused on securing that future? Because energy is not just about generation, it's about readiness. The numbers are compelling here. 2,100 gigawatts by 2030, 12 times growth since 2010, 50% of new capacity by 2035. So yes, I think the world is shifting to the renewable. But here is the real question. Are we growing preparedness at the same pace as capacity? Or are we racing ahead, leaving resilience behind? So we often associate offshore wind with clean energy. But clean does not mean risk-free. The risks are real. We have oil spills risk. We have fire risk. We have collision risk. Mass rescue scenarios. So pause and ask yourself, are these risks new or are they simply underestimated? This is where it becomes complex. 60 to 200 kilometers offshore, no containment in open sea, live high voltage infrastructure, weather that locks you out for days, and then ownership gaps, regulatory voids. So let me ask, in this environment, who is truly in control? And more importantly, when something happens, who leads? So at OSRL, this is where we come in. We are a global response network. We have deep expertise in marine pollution. We have the aerial capability, and we have proven incident command. Because one thing is certain, incidents don't wait for industries to mature. So the question is, are we leveraging experience from the past? Or in other words, are we learning from the oil and gas industry? Or are we waiting to learn the hard way? So let's be clear about what is at stake. Financial, billions in liability. Environmental, irreversible damage. Reputational, trust. Once lost, it's hard to regain. So ask yourself, can we afford to get this wrong? Or more importantly, can we afford to assume we will get it right? So ladies and gentlemen, this is not just about response. It is about system that help you to prevent, to prepare, respond, and recover. But here is the challenge. Where do most organizations focus today, especially in the offshore wind? And where are the gaps really hiding? So readiness is not a document. It is a capability. It consists of plans that are site-specific, equipment that is pre-positioned, mobilization that is verified, not assumed, exercises that test reality, not theory. So the key question is, when was the last time your plan as operator or as main contractor was truly tested? Not reviewed, tested. So let me leave you with this. The turbines are already spinning. So this is not about the future. We are no longer talking about the future, but we are talking about presence. It's happening now. It is about assessing, identifying, engaging, and exercise. So I'll leave you with these final thoughts. If an incident were to happen tomorrow, would we be ready? Or would we be reacting? Because in offshore wind, readiness is not optional. So I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you. Pass on to Rystad.
Thanks, Shopi, for the intro session, and good day, everyone. My name is Petra Manuel, and I work for Rystad Energy. We are a market intelligence company that covers everything about energy. And in this second session, we are going to discuss about our offshore wind outlook, covering the latest, let's say, status for the global offshore wind markets, where we are going to as well deep dive on the APAC regions. And the second agenda for today is going to be supply chain update. We are going to see some of the latest, let's say, supply chain trends that is happening in the market. We can go to the next slide. Yes, so I just want to bring you up to this of our starting point. As you can see here, that yeah, it is quite straightforward that the world needs more energy as the human population grows, economies develop, industrial activity intensifies. We expect that the energy demand is to continue to rise. And you can see that we estimate an increase of 63% in the period of 2000 to 2030, reaching almost 700 exajoules by 2030. And as you may notice that before 2030, most of this demand are going to be met by fossil fuels, including coal, natural gas, oil products. You can see the bottommost three areas there. But post 2030, we are seeing renewables rapidly gaining even more share in the mix. And by 2050, we forecast that renewables is actually dominating the energy mix. And we predict such trends because of this notion that is called energy trilemma. That basically the equation is not only about energy security. If you can go to the next slide, Ines. It's not only energy security that meets, let's say, energy demand, but it is also about affordability and sustainability. So we know that renewables has advantages over fossil fuels in terms of it emits less carbon dioxide, which is the main culprit for global warming. And as the world is tackling this global warming and climate change, we expect more renewables to come in the overall energy mix. In Europe, many nations have stated or pledged, let's say, net zero targets that are extendable to targets of installation for offshore wind capacity by 2030, for example. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. So we have seen that this energy transition from fossil fuels to renewables happening in many parts of the energy markets. But I just want to highlight this trend in the offshore energy market, specifically between offshore oil and gas and offshore wind. You can see on the left-hand side here, we expect that offshore wind capex is to surpass the offshore oil and gas development capex in 2026 already. We have been seeing somewhat flattish development, flattish investment in the offshore oil and gas sector in Europe, but with more, let's say, projects being planned, being consented, being approved, and being constructed in Europe, offshore wind capex is rising quite rapidly from, you can see, 2024 to 2030. On the right-hand chart, I give you as well Asian kind of a status for this trend. You can see that in 2015 the gap is quite actually big, almost 40 billion USD of gap. But as we approach 2030, this gap narrows down to just almost 10 billion. And obviously we are seeing as well many Asian markets. So Taiwan, Japan, South Korea are planning for more auctions in the future, and we expect this gap to even narrow post 2030 as well. And the transition is not only seen in investment, but also the way how oil majors and national oil companies positioning themselves. You can see here that these are the list of E&P companies with significant offshore wind capacity portfolio. You can see international companies like Equinor, Total Energies lead with 15 to 16 gigawatt of offshore wind capacity portfolio. Basically, Equinor and Total, they have a lot of developments in Europe, but also we have seen Equinor, for example, try to reach to the South Korean market, for example. And not only these big oil majors, we are also seeing national oil companies that, especially I want to bring up some of the Asian-based ones. So PTTEP, based in Thailand, they have certain developments in the UK. They bought certain stakes of projects of offshore wind in the UK. Petronas through Gentari is building some projects in Taiwan, in Hai Long, basically. So we are seeing that many of these oil and gas companies are transitioning as well, and investing in offshore wind. Now, if we take a bit closer look to the offshore wind market itself, we are expecting a heightened increase in activity. As you can see here, the bars are showing new capacities added or commissioned, let's say, every year, and the gray triangle behind is about the cumulative capacity or the total installed capacity globally. By the end of last year, we saw that more than 90 gigawatt of capacity became operational. The current largest market is still mainland China, owning more than 50% of the installed capacity. But obviously, you can see the European countries are following. So UK, Germany, Netherlands, Denmark, and I think France at the moment are the top 5 countries in Europe. And outside of mainland China, Taiwan is the largest market with about 3% of that 90 gigawatt having been commissioned. You can see as well, especially in 2026 to 2030, the level of new capacities coming online that we expect can reach 16 to 18 gigawatt. And this is basically double of what we are seeing in 2022 until 2025. And so from cumulative capacity of 90 gigawatt in 2025, we are expecting this number to almost double as well to 188 gigawatt by 2030. Now, post 2030, please take these numbers with a bit of a grain of salt. But basically, we are seeing many new entrants in the market coming to crowd the offshore wind sector, and we are seeing a likelihood of the new capacity to actually be increased post 2030. Can we go to the next slide? And yeah, so I just want to bring us a little bit deeper into the Asia Pacific region. As you can see here, maybe as you saw as well in the previous slide, that mainland China is going to dominate in the near term, especially until 2030. But in Asia, mainland China is going to be still dominant simply because they have, let's say, the capabilities, supply chain capacities. They have, let's say, a lot of population as well to accommodate, and hence they want to get every energy source that they can get. And one of them is obviously offshore wind. But of course, you can as well see that Taiwan every year is installing quite significant offshore wind capacities. And as we approach 2030, we are seeing Japan, South Korea that are currently auctioning, or let's say planning for auctions to be able to commission some of these capacities, especially post 2030. Vietnam has been helped by intertidal wind farms. So as you can see, in 2021, in 2023, it has installed quite significant capacity relatively. But at the moment, Vietnam is also amending their regulations to increase the appetite of developers to invest in Vietnam in the future. If we go to the next slide, we will be able to see, let's say, the latest status of offshore wind in APAC. I've compiled this for you. So, for example, in South Korea, we are seeing many projects undergoing consenting. That means permitting, so that the projects can go under construction. South Korea last year awarded, I think, almost 700 megawatt, and this year they have opened a 1.8 gigawatt auction just in March 2026 for both bottom fixed and floating wind. So yeah, South Korea is one of the hotspot in the sense that an auction is ongoing. India, on the other hand, had a cancelled, let's say, auction last year, and it is replanning some of the tenders to happen, let's say, post 2026. So it is mending the regulations to increase the appetite of international developers. Vietnam as well, a new decree was introduced in 2025. So it sets a new kind of investment policies and bidding process, but we haven't seen, let's say, a fixed auction criteria or regulations for the next round of tenders, for example, in Vietnam. And the country has also shifted the 6 gigawatt target of installation in 2030 to 17 gigawatt in 2035. And I think that makes more sense because it does take time to plan and install such huge capacities of offshore wind. Japan saw some cancellations last year due to some of the cost pressures, and these projects were actually awarded many years ago, so it was kind of a drawback. But obviously, Japan is re-auctioning these round one zones or projects, and they have also some other promotional zones, promising zones to be auctioned in the next few years. So we are still, let's say, waiting for Japan for that kind of fixation of regulations. In Taiwan, as I mentioned, it is one of the largest markets in Asia. Taiwan has awarded almost 10 gigawatt via auction rounds. And there is an auction round ongoing at the moment in Taiwan, offering 3.6 gigawatt, which is obviously substantial for APAC region, and this is expected to open sometime in this quarter actually. For Philippines, there is an auction ongoing as well. So Philippines is one of the markets that remain to be interesting in this year. 3.3 gigawatt of capacity for bottom fix is being auctioned, and the conclusion is expected in the third quarter of this year. And I also include Australia, because Australia is also planning to open an auction in August this year for 2 gigawatt in Victoria. There were some drawbacks as well last year that multiple developers backed out on some of the feasibility license, but it remains interesting because two projects have still the major project status: Star of the South, Blue Mackerel. So these are, let's say, the front runners to win the next auction. So again, multiple auctions happening in Asia Pacific region. So this region remains interesting, and we are also waiting how some of these countries will fix their tender regulations going forward. And yeah, this is just to sum up, let's say, the previous slides that we've been talking about. Obviously, we talk about the energy demand increasing. There is a need for more sustainable energy, emitting less carbon dioxide, and it is translated to installation targets of offshore wind, which is one of the renewables energy sources in many countries in the world. You can see that Europe has many nations with these targets. So the UK leads with 50 gigawatt targets. Germany and Netherlands followed with 30 and 21 gigawatts. But also you can see in Asia, many ambitious targets are there. So India with 30 gigawatts, although we don't expect India to install any within this decade. But we are seeing projects to come in, for example, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. And as you can see here that, yeah, the blue bars show the current installed capacity, and yeah, the delta between our base case 2030 and current installed capacity is substantial. So we are expecting some projects to be commissioned, especially in Asia in the second half of this decade. Yeah, can we continue? Yeah, so I also want to touch a little bit upon let's say the supply chain trends that we are seeing in the market. So turbine size is increasing. If you may have heard it in the market, you can see that the average turbine size for Europe was, let's say, 6 to 7 megawatts by 2020, and Asia maybe 4 megawatt ish. But as we go towards 2030, we are seeing that the average of turbine can reach up to 14 megawatt in Europe. If you go to the next slide, we can see that yeah, Asia is also following with 14 to 15 megawatts. Especially we are seeing in mainland China that many upsize or supersized turbines of 25, 26 megawatt are being planned, and we may see them to be installed even by 2028 at the earliest. The US also uses 14 to 15 megawatts, so you can see that the trend is going to the larger turbines as we approach 2030. And in the next slide, I just want to show you, let's say, the implications to vessel demand as well. You can see that the bars here showing the vessel years, the number of years for one vessel that basically can accommodate the market. You can see that in 2031, we expect 22 vessel years of demand, and many of this demand is for, let's say, more than 14 megawatt turbines. So we are seeing that vessels need to be prepared for, let's say, the bigger turbines, and this means bigger vessels and more, let's say, fuel consumption. Post 2031, we are expecting that some of vessels need to be built because you can see that the demand is rising quite rapidly, and certainly with the current vessel fleet, projects in global outside of China will not be able to meet this demand. If we go to the last slide, you can also see this is our estimation on the rising activity levels on the commissioning and service operations. Basically the increasing activity in offshore installation will also require more and more CSOVs and that means also more fleets and also more fuels are needed going forward. However, the picture is less, let's say, tight compared to the turbine installation vessel you saw in the previous slide, where we estimate that the bottleneck can likely happen in the earliest in 2034 for commissioning and service operation vessels. So I guess I will end it there. Thank you for listening, and yeah, happy to answer any questions that arise.
Thank you, Petra. So I guess it's my turn now. So my name is Marta Januszewska, and I'm a new services and new markets lead at OSRL. And last few years, I actually spent looking at the offshore wind market and see how we can translate some of the lessons learned that we gathered through our 45 years of existence at OSRL, and how we can serve this new industry where our members also enter, as Petra covered that. So some of the lessons learned and some of the points I wanted to raise with this presentation is the preparedness and response. So this is the core of our business, and that's where we can give the most value and share the best lessons learned. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So again, kind of a linking to what Jopi covered in his introduction, we are looking at big boom with offshore wind markets, and there are certain risk scenarios that will be directly translating from oil and gas industry. You know, we have big vessels coming in during the constructions; they carry fuel. We have different constructions as well. There is other risk scenarios, not just the vessel collision. There is also dropped load. There is a spill of fuel from support vessels. That's main. We can see the biggest risk happening during the construction phase or installation. That said, you know, it doesn't mean that the rest of the operations is risk-free, like Jopi mentioned. And equally, you know, sometimes if the operational phase continues, then we can see some of the smaller risks. However, there is a higher consequence when they happen because not necessarily the preparedness is there or the readiness. And some of the biggest challenges, they are quite similar to some of the oil and gas scenarios, but we are looking at high number of stakeholders. And the problem with that is that these stakeholders don't come together very often. Everyone has their own share of work that they do for the project. So we have an operator, we have the service provider, we have manufacturers, we have the vessel owners, and so on. So there's a lot of parties that have their own share of the project, and they don't interface so much with others. So that's where we potentially can see a challenge, because when there is an incident, they all have to work together and they have to assume their relevant roles in the response structure. So this is something that is very important in terms of making sure that there is an emergency response structure and management, and it's agreed between the parties. And also cooperating, making sure that it is tested and everyone knows where they are going. So as much as we can see, the industry booming, we don't necessarily see the preparedness growing at the same pace as the capacity. So this is where we kind of think we can add the value and share some of these lessons learned. If we can go to the next slide, thank you, Ines. And if you can continue with the small additional ones, that if you go to the next. Yes, so what I wanted to show in here is obviously, like I mentioned, there is a lot of parties that come in with this scenarios, that the risk scenarios that we are looking at. And looking at just a simple incident, we have to think about what other parties we need to be involved in the management structure, who will be making the notification to the operator, who will be making sure that there's a coordination offshore, but we equally onshore, because some of the resources will be coming from onshore. So these two parties have to talk together. And then there is the regulatory engagement side of things, which has to be managed, and potentially different levels as well. And this will be, potentially an operator or someone within the operator structure. And then again, mobilizing, and it's depending on the scale of an incident. We are looking at tier 1, so something happening in the immediate vicinity of a location, or we are looking at tier 2, something that potentially affects a bigger space, and then we need to involve other parties, or it can be a big catastrophic event. And we're not just talking about oil spills in here. This is something that we can look at beyond oil spills at the crisis management scenario. If you have potentially, depending of what is described as the crisis in different organizations, it can be a combination of different factors. For example, a dropped load, or a spill, or a collision, or potentially a fatality, or some kind of a medical emergency. So that's important also to understand how, what is the escalation for your risk scenarios, and where we are coming from an incident to a crisis potentially. And then plan also for things like response action. Again, who is going to be doing what in a response, and when. The call out, so that's the main part of your contingency plan. Who am I going to notify when? Trying to create and visualize your incident management system. So what kind of system I will be using, if everyone is aware of that system? Do all of my parties speak the same language and understand, and then know their roles within that system? And then also making sure that you understand that stakeholders are going to be involved, and making sure you have the open lines of communication with them that is tested, and they are being brought at the right time and informed, because that's very important. And obviously the resources, which is one of the most important bit, making sure that you have resources that are kind of commensurating to your risk scenarios, to ensure that you can deliver what is planned in your plan. If we can go to the next slide, please, Ines. Yes, and this is where we kind of come with our experience with the response is the main core when something happens, but in the way leading to the response, we have the preparedness side, which is equally important. And within this preparedness, we kind of divide it into four areas. And you have to have a competent personnel that is able to deliver whatever is captured in your plan for emergencies. So the people needs to be trained. You need to have your plans, and it's not, you will have your SOPEP on the vessel, so ship pollution emergency plan. You will have your contingency plan potentially for the site. You might have your emergency response plan, which covers all emergencies, not just oil spills, and then potentially crisis management plan as well. But again, you have to make sure that all of them work together, and that everyone is familiar with them. Because if you have a 100-page plan that no one has ever seen, or it's somewhere in the shelf, and then emergency happens and you don't really know how to use it, then you might as well not have it, because it's not going to help you. Adequate resources, again, that's something I mentioned earlier. So you have to look at your pre-positioned equipment potentially, where you should be having this equipment. Is it on the vessels? Is it on shore base? Or potentially with someone locally, with a contractor? But just make sure that it is kind of translating to what your risks are. And then one of the quite important one is the exercises as well, because like I said, you can have all three parts of that, but if you don't exercise and you don't know where you can come in, where your equipment can come in, and what the procedure looks like and parties involved, then it's really difficult to do it during the incident. And like one of my colleagues actually said, really good quote is, during the response, during an emergency, if your stakeholders come in and you don't tell them how are you rather than who are you, then it's going to be difficult, because you should be knowing them in advance and know where they come in, and the relationship should be there already. So this is the preparedness side, and then we are looking at the response side. So within, hopefully, if your preparedness is up to speed with everything, you would have your response system built, so you will know where everything come in. But then once the emergency hits, you have to make sure to execute it right, and you have to make sure you have your response system in place, you have your all roles filled out, and potentially any kind of substitute if someone is not there, and then you need to make sure that the access for equipment is there and it's being able to be mobilized. So that's the response side of things. So you have to make sure about the resources as well. And then once this happens, obviously it's a cycle. So we are looking at, once the response stopped, we are looking at lessons learned, and we are looking where we can improve things. So it is always a process, and we always encourage to look at both of the sides, preparedness and response, to make sure you can capture the readiness as a whole. If we can have the next slide, please, Ines. And what I also wanted to do in here is kind of a map throughout our project cycle. So if we start with the development and consenting, this is where your planning starts. This is where you would look at your risk profile, you know, environmental impact assessments, try to map your stakeholders within the regulatory, but also other parties that will be working with you on the project. And this is where you also look at having the concept for your response. So you will start looking at the contingency plans, you will start looking at the emergency response plan, maybe do some modeling to see what the risks are, and you know, how much time you have to prepare. So this is very much a planning phase. And then once we move into construction, this is where the risks really appear. And, you know, we have increased traffic, we have interface risks, you have CMOPs, you know, there's different operations happening at the same time. This is your more risky kind of a period. And this is where we are looking to have the making sure that your team is trained and capable and competent. So we are looking at having the training done in this before that phase. We are looking to have the exercises potentially before and during that phase as well. And obviously you also try to do the capabilities being in place for that phase already. So you would want to have a contracts with someone that you are sure that they will come and respond to your incident, both locally and internationally. You are looking at someone also working with on your plans. You're looking at having resources right there on the vessel or in the onshore base where you have access to it, and also the training and exercises. So that's very important phase, this one. And then the following one, which is the operation and maintenance, as much as, you know, it is seen as much less risky, there is not a lot of potential for a big incident during the operational phase. There is still risk of incident. So again, it shouldn't be the case of complacency and we don't have to worry about this. It's to keep this operational efficiency going. So you will still want to have your exercises. You would still want to revisit your training and, you know, potentially test some of the plans, because this is a good time also to do it. And then if anything comes up, this is your loop for improvement. You have to make sure that this keeps happening and everyone is refreshed on everything that happens. So we are looking at having, again, still your mapping all your stakeholders in that phase to have access to it if there is anything happening, and you want to keep people trained and exercised in here. And then the last phase, which, you know, we are not really talking that much yet, but it's already happening, the decommissioning phase for offshore wind. Again, this is the time when the risk profile increases again, because you will have the vessels coming in, potentially removing the structures. So similar risk to the construction and installation phase appears again. So you kind of have to go through the same steps with trying to understand your notification if anything changed since the time you installed your turbine, if there's any environmental factors that came in, new stakeholders and so on. So it's quite important to revisit this from the beginning and check your notifications, response procedure, test it again, and make sure that the resources are still there, so we are prepared. So this is kind of where we thought we can share a bit of what we've seen, and my colleague now, Shahrina, will show you what it looks like in the real world with one of the case studies that we prepared from the project we delivered in Taiwan. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Martha. So hi, everyone. My name is Shahrina, and I am a Principal Preparedness Advisor at OSRL. So in recent years, I've spearheaded OSRL strategic initiatives within this renewable energy space. So pioneering frameworks and capability building projects specifically tailored for the offshore wind and alternative fuel sectors. So one such project is the Hai Long offshore wind development in Taiwan. So for my part, we will look into this landmark case study. So this project actually offered OSRL this unique opportunity to take the 40 years of proven oil and gas expertise and translate it for the rapidly evolving offshore wind sector. So essentially, we aren't reinventing the wheel. We are bringing what works from the traditional energy into this renewable space. So over the next few slides, I'll share with you a practical look at how we supported their preparedness planning, and I will also highlight the strategic lessons that every operator should keep in mind. Okay, so the Hai Long Offshore project is actually a flagship development located maybe about 45 to 70 kilometers off the coast of Changhua, Taiwan, with a total capacity of about 1,022 megawatts. So it's actually a massive undertaking, really. So to give you a sense of the scale, I think initially Petra talked about how big the size of the turbines are. So for this Hai Long project, it utilizes some of the world's largest jacket foundations and 14 megawatt turbines as well. So for OSRL, really the goal was to ensure that the project scale was matched by this gold standard emergency response framework. So our first task was to deconstruct this offshore wind risk profile. Like Martha has mentioned, there's always this common misconception that because these wind farms don't extract crude oil, that they don't pose a pollution risk. But in reality, the risk is just simply different. So during construction, there's high density heavy lift vessels that creates this genuine risk of collisions and refined oil spills such as marine gas oil. And then of course, when you move into the operational phase, like what Martha has showed, the focus shifts to this contained risk, especially the hydraulic and the dielectric fluids within the turbines themselves. So we do acknowledge that these volumes potentially are smaller than the traditional oil and gas blowout. But of course, there are other factors to think about, the sensitivities of the Taiwan Strait, the distance from the shore. So all these demand a response approach that is just as robust as any other offshore operations, I would say. So here I've portrayed this as a roadmap simply because, I would like to reiterate how preparedness is not just a one-time thing, not at just one point. It is always a continuous commitment that evolves alongside your operations. So in early 2023, OSRL was contracted to develop a marine pollution emergency response plan that is tailored for Hai Long. So at that point, our objectives were really threefold. We had compliance, of course. We would like to meet the requirements of the Taiwan's Ocean Conservation Administration, OCA. We also wanted to bridge that gap, translating oil and gas best practices into this renewable context. And of course, permitting. We wanted to support the project, get them to secure the essential environmental and operational permits. So for the first point there under the emergency response plan, we applied the worst case scenario approach. So Martha showed you that preparedness across the life cycle. So what we essentially had to start with is asking what could go wrong at every phase of the life cycle. So for that also we ran stochastic modeling for a few scenarios. One of it is a worst case scenario of a vessel collision. So following that, we built a strategy that minimizes the environmental impact and reduces operational downtime. So you can see here, really, it's the approach is meant to be holistic. It wasn't just about doing up your plans and then that's it. It was about the hands-on engagement as well. So OSRL supported the Hai Long in understanding what are the equipment needs, what are some of your logistics for these potential spill events. So of course we achieved that through workshops, exercises, equipment commissioning and training, both on site at the Anping port as well as in Taipei office to build that sort of real in-country capability. So one other thing is that the core concept that we introduced was tiered preparedness and response. So this tiered structure is described as, as the escalation of your capability as as your event requires it. So tier 1 being your local resources, to tier 2 national resources, and then subsequently tier 3 as international resources. So to ensure Hai Long had these covered, there were two things that that they did, was to lease OSRL's equipment and to strategically pre-position that at Anping Port to reduce the response time required to bring this equipment to site. And also, secondly, they signed up for OSRL's associate membership to give them that guaranteed access to international resources, both personnel and specialized equipment. So with that, then they sort of, tick their tier 1 through to tier 3 resource capability. And of course, as always, plan updates, preparedness in general do not just stop there. I think entering into the construction phase or eventually into the operational phase, there needs to be a continuous, review of your preparedness, whether you have captured this shifting risk profile as the project transitions as well. So of course, the journey wasn't without hurdles. So one of our primary challenges was actually navigating the regulatory approval process with Taiwan's OCA. And it wasn't a straightforward submission. It involved multiple intensive review cycles and deep stakeholder engagement. But I think the core difficulty lay in the standardization gap. So we were introducing international response standards that were largely unfamiliar within the local context. So this required us to work hand in hand with the Hai Long team to essentially demystify these global protocols. So our objective was, was this delicate balancing act. We had to adapt these concepts to meet the specific local requirement and expectations while ensuring that we don't compromise the international good practice. So it was really about finding that sweet spot where local compliance meets the global excellence. The second challenge was what I would call the mismatch strategy risk. So I think in adapting the oil and gas spill response frameworks to fit the distinct risk profile of offshore renewable, we wanted to ensure that the framework wasn't, just sort of like a cookie cutter or copy and paste, but or generally I would use the word operationally mismatched. But we wanted this integration to be a more thoughtful application of risk-based planning. And lastly, low visibility risk. I think Martha brought on this point really well. So I think one of the challenge was also addressing the mindset that clean energy means no risk. So we had to demonstrate that high traffic marine environment, of course, these are inherently complex. So it necessitates a robust response capability regardless of the energy sources. So overcoming these challenges, the results were definitive or encouraging. So we successfully demystified these international standards for, for the local context and ensured the integration set by OCA. And of course, the major milestone was the formal OSRP approval from OCA. This was a critical green light for project compliance that allows Hai Long to enter the construction phase with a very clear response framework and a deeply embedded culture of readiness. So what can then the wider industry learn from these projects? So I think firstly, there isn't a need to reinvent the wheel. The energy transition introduced distinct risks, but you just can simply adapt proven frameworks, proven tools, as well as response philosophies. So this way, the offshore wind project can raise their preparedness far more quickly and effectively than if they tried to build everything from scratch. Secondly, it's about building regulatory trust. So that is very paramount. It requires early, transparent, and consistent dialogue with local authorities to, keep the project moving. And finally, plan for the worst. So strong planning prevents a small incident from becoming a reputational crisis. So this means planning for your worst case scenario, considering your tiered response approach and having a robust training and exercise program. Okay, and with that, I'll leave you with this final thought. I think when we talk about preparedness, it's a mindset and not just a document. So whether you are operating in oil and gas or transitioning into renewables, an integrated, scalable strategy is what ensures you can respond both confidently and effectively. Thank you for your time. I think I'll hand this back to Ines.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sharina, and thank you to all of our presenters today. We do have a few minutes left, so I would like to kind of open the floor for some questions from our participants here today. Your mics are on mute, but you do have the chat open, so you can drop your questions in the chat and I will read them back to our presenters. So anything you have in mind, please take the next couple of minutes to just drop it in the chat. Don't be shy. And we can go ahead and have some questions for our presenters. While people write, maybe I can share a question for the group, maybe even for Sharina, because you were talking about your experience in this field. So where would you say that at what point of the whole process of the installing the offshore wind turbines would you say that is the highest point of risk? Is it during the construction phase where you have so many vessels involved? Is it during the operations? Like, where would you say that is really key to get started right away?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, Ines. So I think like what Martha, I think she shared through the preparedness, through the life cycle. So we have identified that the construction phase is actually where the highest risk for the life cycle is. And it's really because of the very high vessel movement, high traffic density. And I think Petra shared that as well. Like, as the wind turbines get larger, so do the vessels as well. So I think one of the things that we had to work with Hai Long was identifying among this fleet of vessels, which is the worst case scenario, which one's probably carrying a heavy fuel oil, and what's the capacity like, so that we can model it accordingly. Yeah, but that doesn't mean that the other life cycle, other phases doesn't carry any risk. But, in terms of higher risk, it's probably coming from the construction phase. I think with regards to maybe the operational phase, then we have to relook into, what is the volume that the turbines are holding in terms of, the dielectric fluids and things like that.
I think if I can just add to this as well. So it's rightly so, like Sharina was saying about the construction phase and the amount of vessel traffic. But I think what we have to also take into consideration is other factors, because whenever the incident occurs, regardless of the phases, if you don't have the resources, or if your conditions in terms of being very close to the shoreline can cause the spill, even the tiny spill, to come and be present on the shoreline, then you are faced with a very different scenario. And obviously this is not the situation for every case, but I think it is important to kind of understand what is my risk scenario, and with that, what is my worst case scenario. So what would be the absolute worst, and prepare for that. Obviously being a credible worst case scenario, not a rocket falling from the sky, so kind of a thing, but worst credible case scenario should be definitely exercised and understood. With that, what do I definitely need to make sure that I can respond and be prepared.
Amazing. Thank you, Marta, and thank you, Sharina. There's a question here in the chat. Let me just go through it. So someone is saying that they face the same challenges that you guys mentioned, and getting people to understand that even though the risks are minimal, preparation is key. So the question is it the responsibility of the project manager, the parks project manager, to put an emergency plan in place, or is it up to each subcontractor with which it interfaces? How is that handled?
Well, it will be typically an operator that will be required to have an emergency plan. Obviously, that is most of the time the case. However, we are looking at different countries, and many countries have different regulations. So it's always best to follow what the regulations were where you are. But it will be typically an operator, and then they will be also in charge to kind of bring together all the other parties and make sure that everyone can work together. That's kind of my experience. I don't know if anyone else in the chat would like to add something.
Yeah, Martha, I think I'll just add on that. I think the word here I would use is like bridging documents. So I think the main so I think in this case, like Hai Long, probably they are legally responsible to make sure that there is a plan in place. But I know that they were working with several contractors, and then they work with them to make sure that each of these contractors have their own plan, and subsequently it would be integrated into sort of like the master ERP. So yeah, it's really everybody coming together, but I guess someone, the project manager holds that maybe legal responsibility in a sense, if that makes sense.
Yes, and equally, we have to also think about the reputational side of things, because if anything happens, all of the names that appear, if you have your vessel, regardless if it's your vessel or if it's your turbine, all of the names will be then looked at and will be under scrutiny. So I guess whoever is taking part, I would take my personal responsibility to make sure I'm prepared and then feed in within a bigger structure. So it's really everyone's responsibility.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think if I have to sort of like sum it up, I think the project manager sort of like owns the safety of the site, while you have all these subcontractors that owns the safety of the task that you are probably carrying out. So really neither can succeed without, this sort of like bridge connecting them in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing. Thank you, guys. I think that's all the questions we have in the chat at the moment. I just wanted to check if any of you has any final thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience here today.
I think it's, we definitely wanted to also make it open for everyone to make sure that we are very approachable. So if you have any questions regarding that, we will be very happy to support in terms of our best experience. And we will be also attending some of the offshore wind events, so you can find us there. But yeah, it's this is kind of the way how we are structured as OSRL. We work with industry, and we are very open in terms of sharing our lessons learned. So yeah, feel free to reach out anytime.
Oh, yes, that's a good segue actually, because as you can see here, you have here the emails of all of our presenters here today. Some specific APAC representatives as well, if that's your region, and as well from our guest speaker here today, Petra from Rystad, in case you want to talk a little bit more about market analytics and what to expect from the future, really. And that QR code that you can see in the screen as well, and that link will take you to our offshore wind section of our website, where you can find a little bit more information on how our services translate into the offshore wind industry. And through our website, you can also visit the Knowledge Hub, which has already articles, field guides, handbooks, case studies, all sorts of resources that can help you find more information about this specific topic. But apart from that, I think that's all we had today. Thank you so much to everyone who joined in, and thank you so much to all of our speakers today and for all the insights that you shared. This was really, really amazing because it's a up and coming sort of topic, and it's really good to get such rich insight at this stage of the journey. To everyone who joined here today, you are going to receive an email with the recording of the session, so you can visit it again, get reminded of some of the things that were shared. So yeah, keep an eye on your inbox because you will receive an email with that. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.